listen to your breath?
Lindsay sucked overpriced orange juice through a plastic straw and watched her father collect his glass of amber liquid and leave cash on the bar. He returned with the gait of a man who refused to acknowledge an injury. Did anyone try to steal my bag? Small band of ninjas. I took care of it. Well done. He settled onto the tall stool and turned the ice in his drink with his stir straw. He tapped it at the edge of the glass and then placed it carefully on a cocktail napkin. Okay, this is good. You're doing okay, yeah? Yeah, Dad, I'm fine. Great. Well, it was good seeing you. She had heard the bit before. She smiled politely but could not muster an actual laugh. He had a long layover and she had managed to beg off the last time, let Danny take the weight for her. Today Danny was in Albuquerque. She felt more uncomfortable making her father kill 2.5 hours alone in an airport than she felt sitting with him for at least some of that time. I can't believe Daniel can afford to come down here every time you have a layover. I don't understand. It winds up being pretty expensive. I mean, not just the $8 orange juice. He always has coffee, of course. And there's gas, and the parking down here is exorbitant. He's never complained. Right, he wouldn't. Do you need me to cover your parking? Me? No. Are you kidding? Paul studied her, trying to see through to the meaning behind the words. He could usually do that with people, but Lindsay had always been an irritating mystery to him, an enigma wrapped in incomprehensible resentment. But I think Daniel's always about a quarter to broke. I don't think it's been so bad since he quit smoking pot. Paul watched his daughter to see whether anything in her expression would tell him that Daniel had lied about that. He couldn't tell anything. Still, I worry about him. There's no union, you know? What? For comedians, there's no union, no 401k, no insurance, no safety net. He hasn't come to us for anything in a while. When was he coming to you for anything? Oh. He let that drop. He's grown into a pretty terrific comedian. There's a difference. Instead of a graphic t-shirt under a flannel button-down, he wears a jacket and tie. Paul chuckled. Also, he quit smoking pot. Right. Paul sipped his scotch. I watched a few episodes of your show. Lindsay said nothing. She waited. There's some really good dialogue in there. Lindsay nodded. The words felt loaded. They felt carefully chosen. They seemed to deliberately leave out so much else about the show, even as they took the shape of a compliment. You're working with the tension between the words in a way I've never seen anyone do it in television. Huh. Did you ever see The Wire? No, I don't. I think, I don't really watch much TV. I do know that. She had set her phone to sound an alarm at the 45-minute mark so that she could make a graceful exit, claiming urgency if things were too difficult. She knew it could not possibly be nearing that time yet. She doubted it had been 10 minutes. Which ones did you watch? The first 3. I figured I'd do them in order. Oh, good. You're going to keep on? Oh, yeah. I'm very interested to see where it goes. Well, that's really nice to hear. It's kind of unnerving when you put my subtext on the screen. Lindsay leaned in now. Now I'm interested to see where it goes. What do you mean? Where were you recognizing your subtext on the screen? Paul drank. I noticed it right off in the first episode. When they leave the grandparents' house, the whole family in their ridiculous coats and scarves. There's all that business of saying goodbye at the door and him refusing to take Tupperware full of leftovers, and they bundle into the car and take off all the outerwear in silence as the car warms up. And then they pull out of the driveway, and the first thing the guy says, Lawrence, right. The first thing Lawrence says is, well, that was relatively painless. I laughed aloud when I heard that. It was always what was going on in my head at those sorts of things. You're kidding, right? What do you mean? That wasn't subtext, Dad. You always said that aloud. I did? Every time. Mom's parents, your brother's place in Manhattan, every time. We'd get in the car, and If Daniel or I started to talk, you'd put up a finger and say 3-minute rule to keep us from saying whatever you imagined we were going to say within any possible earshot of the relatives. The indication that we were far enough out of range was when you said, well, that was relatively painless. Then we could start to talk. Paul turned his glass on the cocktail napkin, and the napkin turned with it. Huh. I don't remember that. Lindsay sipped her orange juice. She realized she was rationing herself. She didn't want to finish it, didn't want this to be a 2-beverage conversation. Well then, you certainly captured the moment. Lindsay nodded. If you keep watching, I will, I'm going to. Lindsay went on as though he hadn't interrupted. You'll see a bunch of stuff that feels like us. Paul paused for a moment, went through a little performance of choosing not to say something and then deciding to say it. And Lawrence is gay, yeah? Yeah. But Noreen doesn't know. She has suspicions. That starts to come out before the end of the first season. Paul nodded slowly. Do you want to have this conversation? I mean, are we going to have this conversation? Your mother knows who I am. Okay. She doesn't like to think about it. She doesn't like to talk about it. I'm right, though, yeah? I don't know. Lindsay waited. She sipped her orange juice. She knew her father well enough to know that he wouldn't let that kind of a lie stand. She was right. I think of myself as bisexual. She waited. It's not like I can't perform with a woman, you know, with your mother. Well, that certainly sounds like a life of impulsive passion. Paul barked an uncharacteristic laugh. She had expected a subdued snort, but the sharp sound made her laugh in response. I'm going to need another drink. You haven't finished that one yet. I didn't mean I was empty, honey. I meant this is going to be at least a 2-scotch talk. He sipped, then set his glass down on the napkin. He dipped his straw into the scotch, put a fingertip over the end of the straw to catch a bit of liquid in the suction, and then used the straw to draw a careful line of alcohol around the bottom of the glass. When he turned his drink again, it tore out a near-perfect circle of paper that stuck to the bottom of the glass when he lifted it to sip. Yeah, you're probably right. But you stay. Lindsay did her best to sound concerned, interested in her father and his decisions, but she knew even as she said it that whatever his response was would shape the direction of her next 6 episodes. She knew that she was doing professional research as much as she was seeing her father as vulnerable and honest as he had ever been with her. She suddenly understood why Daniel kept meeting him at the airport for his layovers. She understood why it left her brother introspective and ever so slightly changed each time. I'm certainly not at one of the far ends of the sexual spectrum. He finished the drink in a long pull and then said, in all of your thinking and writing and exploration of my sexuality, kid, I think you failed to notice the most important factor. Lindsay searched his eyes at the same time she searched her own memories, her own experiences, for the thing he was hinting at. Paul leaned forward and spoke softly, as though what he was saying was a secret. He brought his face so close to hers that she could smell the alcohol in his breath, and behind it the tobacco. I love her. Then he made the movement into the weight shift that led to him standing up from the awkwardly high seat. He captured his glass in his left hand and said, you want another orange juice? Is that just plain orange juice? Not yet. I'm still doing okay on this one. Paul headed up to the bar. Lindsay thought about the implications of what he had just said. She thought about how her character's entire arc could be changed if the gravity that drew him to the difficult relationship she had established for him was not indebtedness or shame, not guilt or fear, but simple love. She tore a strip from one edge of her napkin. She thought about how much darker, how much sadder that would make the betrayal his impulses had led him to. She thought about how many times in scenes with the wife he hadn't said that he loved her, and how few times she had ever heard her father say it to her mother. Even telling Lindsay that he loved his wife, he had delivered it like a dangerous and powerful secret. She thought about how pathetic her desire was to hear her father profess his love for her, to hear him say that he was proud of her, to hear him say clearly and simply that he had liked the show. She sipped her orange juice. She tore the last width of her napkin into 2 long strips and added them to the small collection of strips that she didn't fully remember creating. Paul rejoined her, scotch in hand. I had her make it a double. It's a long layover. Has Mom got her drinking under control at all? She's not the one you have to worry about. He raised his glass at her. You've always been functional and self-aware about it. Paul shrugged. She tries to keep it to 2 a night. Tries? Paul closed his eyes and pushed his head forward while he patted the air with his hands, a gesture she knew well, a gesture that meant, just let this lie, it's more of a battle than I want to take on. They sipped in companionable silence for a while. You know there's a company that comes up at the end of each of your shows called Family Dynamic? Lindsay snorted. Yes, I do. Sorry, I don't really know how it works. Is that who you work for? That's my company. We own the show. I thought it was on TNT. TNT is the initial broadcaster, but there are a lot of different producing entities that work with any network, especially in cable. They've got first rights, but I can still take it elsewhere for syndication if it lasts long enough to have a full package. Or, there's other options now. Netflix, Amazon. Also, there's some potential for European release. Nothing works the way it used to. That's correct. Things were very different when your mother and I met, when we got married. Lindsay wanted to know where he was going. She wanted to let him speak. She carefully wove the strips of her cocktail napkin into a mesh as if she was a child working on a kindergarten crafts project. People have a lot more options now. Lindsay pulled the last of the orange juice through her straw with a slurping sound. She waved at the bartender and signaled that her glass was empty. He nodded. So, does it look like that'll happen? Like what'll happen? Her phone made a chirping noise. She reached into her purse and pushed a button to silence it. Do you have to get that? No, that's not a sound of urgency. Paul nodded. The full Monty thing. What? For syndication. Oh, package. A full syndication package. Right, sorry, I don't know the language. That's okay. Your mother keeps thinking the show is on something called the Dynamite Network. I know. I haven't corrected her. I don't think she'd enjoy the show. He paused and then he said, I think there are aspects of it that would upset her. Lindsay felt a combination of sadness and rage, which she expressed by ignoring them entirely. That generally requires 100 episodes, and I'm starting to think we'll get there. There's been some talk about a 2-season commitment coming in. If that happens, we're golden. We're coming into the end of our 3rd season now, and we're still getting pretty good ratings. Well, that sounds terrific. We got really loyal fans. A whole solid online fan base. Every week, 3 or 4 members of the cast live tweet the show, and there are hashtag games that go on. Audience involvement. Jesus, I feel like I'm listening to dialogue from an abstruse science fiction film. There are no science fiction films anymore, Dad. Just movies. Paul pulled his head backward as though someone had flicked at his nose. He said, What's that distinction about? Lindsay said, Films wear jackets and ties and don't smoke pot. Paul laughed. Nice. It's a callback. I learned it from Daniel. The bartender brought Lindsay her orange juice. He's okay, though, right? Daniel? Yeah, he's okay. Last time I saw him, it looked like he had put on some weight. Are you kidding me? Not bad, he wasn't obese, but he looked soft. Lindsay sipped her orange juice. Yeah, he's okay. What happened there? Your jaw got very tense. Daniel is fine. His weight is fine. Well, I wasn't saying it wasn't fine. It's just that I know sometimes weight gain can be a symptom of something else, depression, what have you. He's fine. He's booking gigs. He's being hilarious. I saw him in New York. I know, you took the train down from Boston. I took the train down from Boston. He was funny. He always is. There was one bit that I think he has to stop doing. I know. He wrote a long piece about how his father said he should stop doing the bit. Paul squeezed his nose for a moment, taking that in. I was thinking of asking you not to keep putting my sexuality in your show. It's a character, Dad. It's not you. You know what I mean. I think you're going to like where it's all going. Paul nodded slowly, realizing that she was not going to change the show to protect him. I'll keep watching. Okay, I'll keep writing and producing. You do that. You seem to be pretty good at it. He sipped his drink, and Lindsay could see that his focus had begun to soften. His gestures were becoming a little bit more vague and a little bit more broad simultaneously. She sipped her orange juice and watched him from an uncomfortable position of judgment and with a degree of pity, though she could not quite admit that to herself, could not name the feeling. Paul saw her look and entirely misinterpreted it. I'm not saying that he's fat. Not like when you gained all that weight after Michelle died. She didn't die. She committed suicide. Paul raised his shoulders and closed his eyes, conceding the point. And I wasn't fat. Oh, don't do that, honey. What am I doing? You were fat. I was a little bit overweight. We have pictures. You were... Never mind. It doesn't matter. Lindsay watched as her father destroyed a second cocktail napkin, this time creating a rougher, less satisfying paper disc. She said, "Here," and slid her torn and reconstructed napkin over to him. You made me a kindergarten potholder. I'm touched. He flattened it, smoothing the weave lovingly, and then set his drink on it. After Michelle killed herself, I gained 9 pounds. Paul nodded. And now you're dating Tessa. I live with Monique. Right, Monique. Who's Tessa? Tessa is my assistant. Right, your assistant. Yes. Because you need an assistant to run your company where you make television shows that you own and license to a giant corporation. Yes. Paul took a deep breath. I really am sorry, you know. Okay. Lindsay had no idea what he was sorry about. Paul made a gesture, broad and vague, that she thought meant all of it, everything. What he said was, we both really liked Michelle. She shouldn't have done that. I know it was hard for you. She said, okay. But what she meant was, it would have been nice to hear that at the time. Then she added, I don't think it's for us to say what she should or shouldn't have done. Paul nodded. Someday I'll tell you about Michael Donnelly. I don't know who that is. That's because I haven't told you about him yet. Lindsay nodded. Did he commit suicide? He tried. Hurt himself very badly. After a brief pause, he repeated, very badly, and he ran a finger down his cheek as though that indicated a particularly bad kind of injury, though Lindsay had no idea what the gesture was meant to indicate. And he was... She left a long gap, hoping Paul would fill it in, but he didn't, so she guessed, a friend? He didn't want me to marry your mother. Lindsay took that in. She let the pieces fit together in her head, the implied backstory, the implied confession of something undefined but fully realized behind the inebriated clues. She said, at Michelle's funeral I met her mother. I sat with her and she looked straight ahead. I remembered Michelle telling me that one of the things she liked about us... About who? Us, you, me, Mom, Daniel, us. I didn't know she liked us. She said she liked the way we look at each other. Not just when we talk or whatever. She said we all do it. She said we watch one another like we're trying to spot poker tells. Paul snorted and squeezed his nose. Her phone made a sound that was not an alarm she had set. She wanted not to have heard it. She wanted to stay with the conversation, with this iteration of her father balanced on a 3-legged stool of alcohol, intimacy, and reminiscence. Is that a sound of urgency? She offered a sad nod. I know, it's a workday for you. Go ahead. She found the phone in her bag. She moved her thumb about the screen, selecting the app. Opening the text, she read it. She read it again. She put the phone away. Bad news? Her father asked. She shook her head. Very good news. There was no way she could explain to him how good the news was. He could not possibly understand the significance, not just financially for her, but in terms of her career, her status in a male-dominated industry, the actual power that had just fallen to her as a byproduct of the success she had just achieved. Is it about served cold? We're picked up for 2 more seasons, 44 more episodes. Well, that's terrific. I suppose that's the sort of thing people in Hollywood would congratulate you for. I'm sure everyone at your company is very proud. He had come so close, and he had been so open, so vulnerable moments earlier that she took a chance before she had time to control the impulse, before she knew what she was risking. Dad, do you like the show? Are you proud of the work I'm doing? Paul said, and he said it with absolute sincerity, Honey, you have good ratings and loyal fans with cast tweets and hashtags, and now you have a full syndication package. I don't know what you think you need my approval for. I should probably, yeah, that sounds like something you should stay on top of. Lindsay stood up to go. Seriously, if you need me to cover your parking, no, I'm good. I've got it. She hugged him, and he hugged her without standing up from the stool. She wondered how many more drinks he would have alone in the airport in the time he had left there. She put money on the bar for her orange juice, hoisted her carry-all purse onto her shoulder, and left the bar. But she circled back past the partition that separated the seating area from the walkway and said to her father, You fly safely, would you? Paul said, Oh, I don't think they're going to put me in charge. They both chuckled, and she walked away. She turned back and knew, in an embarrassed sort of way, that she was looking to see whether he was watching her go. He was not watching her go. Unaware of her gaze, he folded the woven napkin carefully into his pocket and turned his glass on the unprotected tabletop, allowing it to weep a ring print of condensation right there on the exposed surface.